6 Creepy Tales and True Stories, Volume 3, featuring various narrators. All stories will be either true or based on real events. Enjoy. The Man in the Ice Cream Stand by Highway to Hell, narrated by Creep Reads. I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, in a very nice town with a lot of great people in it. However, it's in a bit of a bubble, meaning that the towns and areas surrounding it are not the nicest places. Crime, drugs, homeless people, etc. My town never had much of a problem with these things, but once in a while, someone would come over and cause some trouble. This is a story of one of those times. I was 10 at the time, and my father and I had a habit of going for ice cream after my karate lessons. The ice cream shop we went to was a small outdoor stand right next to the gym. It was a quiet, local place that was usually pretty busy. But since my karate lessons didn't end until 9 PM, the time the shop closed, we were usually the only ones there at that point. It was owned and run by an Irishman named Mr. Murphy, who knew us by name and was always very outgoing and friendly. I should also mention that the gym and the ice cream stand were located in a large strip mall with quite a large parking lot, which was notoriously frustrating to get out of as it had 2 one-way entrances, but only one exit. One day, I'd stayed at karate for an extra hour because my father had to work late and couldn't get me until 10. Luckily, the gym was open late and my karate instructor stayed with me until my father arrived. The rest of the parking lot was fairly empty, as most of the stores were closed. When my father finally came, we walked over to the ice cream stand, thinking that it was probably closed. But to our surprise, the metal screen was only halfway closed, and there was a light on the inside. We figured Mr. Murphy was still there, and since he knew us, he might be willing to serve us late. My dad knocked on the counter and asked if anyone was there. No one answered, but we heard some rustling around, like someone had suddenly moved and knocked something over. My dad knocked again. This time, silence. We were about to turn and leave when suddenly, the metal screen opened up. Inside the stand was not the friendly ice cream man I had known, but a tall, skinny, heavily bearded man wearing a windbreaker that was at least 3 sizes too small. I couldn't see what he had below his waist, but he wasn't wearing a shirt, and he smelled like my dog after rolling around in the mud all day. He had a very creepy grin on his face, showing a crooked row of yellow, nicotine-stained teeth. His hair looked like it was falling out. His eyes were squinting, as if he couldn't see us clearly. He stared at us for a while, then cocked his head and started to speak. "You buy ice cream." That voice. I can still remember that voice perfectly. I'm not going to say it sounded inhuman, or devilish, or unnatural, because that's simply not the best way to describe it. It was disturbed. It was delirious. It was a bit insane. And his smile after he said it. He tilted his head down a bit so I could see the top of his balding hair as his grin grew wide from cheek to cheek. My dad instantly grabbed me and turned me away. He shouted at the man, "Who are you? Where is the owner?" "You buy ice cream." How did you get into the stand?" "You buy ice cream." "I'm calling the police." It was at this point the man placed something on the counter. He held it in his fists, so I couldn't see it at first, until he opened his palm and held it out for us. It was a small knife, probably one used to cut fishing wire and such. Small, but sharp. My dad had enough at this point. He picked me up and threw me in the car. He came inside and locked the doors as he took out his cell phone to call the police. Meanwhile, though I was as scared as I had ever been in my life, I turned back to look at the stand. The man was not in the window anymore, but outside the stand, walking slowly towards our car. Not only that, but he had the small knife clenched in his fist. I was choked with fear and couldn't speak, but I did reach over and shake my dad's leg. My dad looked out the window, saw the man approaching, and immediately turned on the car and sped off. I mentioned how there was only one exit to the parking lot. One of the reasons it's so annoying is that it exits onto a busy street with a light, and even at 10 PM, it can be difficult to get out immediately. We went through the exit lane, but had to stop at the end since there was a traffic light and cars were speeding across from us. Even though we were stuck for a minute, my dad looked behind us and told me he didn't see the man anymore. I was starting to feel a little better until we felt something thud against our trunk. We turned around, and there he was, screaming something indecipherable, banging on our truck. His grin had turned into an angry snarl, and his eyes were open wider. I screamed as my dad decided to floor us into the oncoming traffic. Luckily, we didn't cause an accident, but my dad raced home at about twice the speed limit. Over the next few days, it was all pieced together. The man had apparently broken into the ice cream stand after the owner had left and was sleeping in there. The door was locked, but he was able to pick it. They got some fingerprints off the door and inside the stand and were able to ID him. He had a pretty long police record, but no other documents of residence, ID, even birth. There was a current warrant out on him for aggravated assault and attempted rape. My dad went and gave an official statement of the incident to the police, but after that, everything just pretty much went back to normal, as they usually do in these stories. I don't know if they ever caught the guy, and as far as I know, no one else in our town ran into him. The man became a figment of my imagination, and if it weren't for my father retelling the story to everyone he knew, I may have even forgot about it entirely. The only mystery left in the story was the ice cream stand. It never reopened after that night, and I never saw Mr. Murphy again. That's not saying much since I only ever saw him at the stand. I never asked my dad about it, since I find it awkward to talk about the incident with him, seeing as he sees it as a heroic escape story and I see it as a memory to forget. Still, I find it odd that such a successful, ambitious man like Mr. Murphy would close down his shop for good overnight. I guess that's the disappointing part about stories like these. There's always that one unsolved detail that will bring you back to that memory you want to forget. Intruder Carlton Camera by ALX Jason. Narrated by Creepreads. So, this story takes place over one summer when I was 14 years old. It was around 11 PM and I was in my bedroom on my computer. I had just gotten home. I was living with my brother at the time because my parents were in Florida for a while, so me and my brother were the only ones home and the only ones who had access to the house. I needed a photo of myself for something, I don't remember what, and I opened my camera roll to look through. The picture on screen is what I found. Immediately, my whole body froze and I couldn't move. I immediately closed the camera roll and sat in my bed for a while. I began shaking and tears of fright came to my eyes. I gained the courage to open the camera roll, to look again. I stared at the photo for at least 10 minutes, feeling more uneasy every second. I checked the time the picture was taken, and that made me more distressed. The picture was taken at 9:45 PM. What made it worse is that me and my brother both left the house at 8 to get dinner. No one was home at the time the picture was taken. Afraid to leave my room, I picked up my phone and messaged my brother. I told him that I was so scared I couldn't move and if he could come here. He asked what was wrong and I sent him the picture from my computer along with what happened. Him thinking it was a joke, laughed and told me good night. Me not joking, I called him. He could obviously hear me crying and started questioning me. I told him to come to my room, and he did so. He entered my room with a golf club for protecting. At this point, we were both shitting our pants, staring at the blurry picture of a man we didn't recognize. We decided to go check out the house and see if anyone was home, so we proceeded to swipe through all 4 floors of the house. We didn't see anything sketchy on the top 3 floors, so we walked down to the basement. We walked down the stairs, and my brother led the way. "Shit," he whispered. I looked to the back corner of our basement, where the cellar door that leads to the outside is. The door and the hatchway that covers the steps to outside are both wide open. After this happened, we called the police and showed them the picture and told them the story. They told us to lock our doors and call them if we heard or saw anything. We locked the doors and both sat in his room for the rest of the night. Whoever was in our house and on my computer must have opened the computer and opened the camera accidentally. He must have accidentally pressed the spacebar while the camera was open in the background and snapped a picture of himself. I still wonder why someone would break into a house for nothing. Nothing was stolen. No drawers or cabinets were open. Nothing seemed out of place. My brother ended up moving out of the house a few days after, in fear the guy would come back. My Little Brother and the Rabbit, narrated by Black Cleric.
When I was about 16, my little brother, who was about 6 at the time, started telling me about a rabbit who would come and visit him. I blew it off, thinking it was his imagination. The next few days, it's all he talked about, how the rabbit would open a hole in the wall. He said that he left his body and went through the hole, and the rabbit showed him places and told him things that when he got back, he couldn't remember. I just told him he's probably dreaming all this up. Well, that night, there was scratching on the wall in my room. I looked around and I couldn't find anything making the noise, and decided it must be something outside or a mouse that got inside the wall. Well, it just got louder and louder until I finally got dressed and went outside. Nothing was there. I went back in my room, where the scratching was still going on. I hit the wall a few times, hoping to scare away the rodent. It stopped for a few seconds, and then continued. It kept going until around 3 a.m. Then it stopped completely. The next morning we were eating breakfast, and my little brother didn't say anything about the rabbit. As glad as I was to finally not hear him talk about it, it just wasn't normal. So I asked him, "Didn't the bunny see you last night?" Now what he said chills me even today. He said, "He didn't take me anywhere last night. He told me he was trying to see you and that you wouldn't let him in. He said you tried to hit him." After that, I started asking questions about this bunny. All I got was that he would take him places and tell him secrets. The stuff he learned he would forget when he came back. Also, the bunny wasn't just a bunny. He supposedly looked like the guy off Donnie Darko, a more realistic version. But that movie hadn't been released yet. The bunny finally quit coming around after another week when he tried to get my brother to come live with him. My brother said no, and that he wanted to stay with his mommy and daddy. The bunny's never been back since. Sadly, my little brother passed away 10 years later. This sort of thing happened to my sister at night, but her visitor was a man who would come through the window, and he would climb on her walls and ceiling and talk to her about her day. He even gave her a band-aid when she stubbed her toe, and it was still there the next morning.
The Sound of Isolated Silence, narrated by Stuart Schlomock.
We live in a world full of noise, full of life. Cars humming and honking, people talking to each other, birds chirping, kids laughing and playing, adults yelling at football games and bantering about politics. We're greeted with jingles and alerts on Facebook and in texts. Television and radio provide us with the sounds of entertainment. We experience all of this loudness every day. But there's one sound that we tend to overlook. Silence. It's a sound that is hidden from us until a moment arrives where ambience is suspended and we find ourselves isolated. How appropriate that there is an anechoic chamber in Minnesota that has been titled as the world's quietest room. The chamber's background noise has been measured to be negative 9.4 decibels, while the human ear cannot detect noise beyond 0, making the room completely soundproof. The longest anyone has withstood the room is 45 minutes. That's an easy record to break, right? Think again. Those who have attempted to withstand the isolation in this dark, echoless room have claimed that within just a minute or two, you could hear the blood pumping through your body. Your breathing becomes louder, your heartbeat is amplified. After 6 minutes, your own thoughts seem to become audible. Certain participants began to hallucinate after only 15 to 20 minutes. They would see objects that weren't really there. They would develop the feeling of being watched by malevolent beings. They would see faces staring at them from the corners of the chamber. Lab workers now supervise the chamber's exit because the intensity of the silence has even caused a few visitors to temporarily lose their sense of balance and their ability to walk, which led to their inability to escape. If none of this intimidates you, though it definitely should, and you have the money to spend, feel free to book a flight to Minneapolis. Take a taxi from St. Paul International Airport to Orfield Laboratories. You might get lucky and set a new Guinness World Record. Or you might fall short and experience the same unsettling sensations as the participants before you. Either way, once you leave that room, you will be forever thankful for living in a world full of noise. And you will never hear silence the same way again.
The Dyatlov Pass Incident, narrated by Plague Pasta.
The Dyatlov Pass accident refers to an incident that resulted in the death of 9 ski hikers in the northern Ural Mountains. The incident happened on the night of February 2nd, 1959 on the east shoulder of the mountain Kholat Syakhl, a Mansi name meaning Mountain of the Dead. The mountain pass where the accident occurred has been named Dyatlov Pass after the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov. The mysterious circumstances of the hikers' deaths have inspired much speculation. Investigations of the deaths suggest that the hikers tore open their tent from within, departing barefoot into the heavy snow. While the corpses show no signs of struggle, one victim had a fractured skull, 2 had broken ribs, and 1 was missing her tongue. The victims' clothing contained high levels of radiation. Soviet investigators determined only that a compelling unknown force had caused the deaths, barring entry to the area for years thereafter. The causes of the accident remain unclear. It had been agreed beforehand that Dyatlov would send a telegraph to their sports club as soon as the group returned to Vizhai. It was expected that this would happen no later than February 12th. But when this date had passed and no messages had been received, there was no reaction. Delays of a few days were common in such expeditions. Only after the relatives of the travelers demanded a rescue operation did the head of the institute send the first rescue groups, consisting of volunteer students and teachers. On February 20th, later the Army and police forces became involved, with planes and helicopters being ordered to join the rescue operation. On February 26th, the searchers found the abandoned camp on Kholat Syakhl. The tent was badly damaged. A chain of footsteps could be followed leading down towards the edge of nearby woods, on the opposite side of the pass, 1.5 kilometers northeast. But after 500 meters, they were covered with snow. At the forest edge, under a large old pine, the searchers found the remains of a fire, along with the first 2 dead bodies, those of Krivan Ischenko and Doroshenko, shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. Between the pine and the camp, the searchers found 3 more corpses, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, who seemed to have died in poses suggesting that they were attempting to return to the camp. They were found separately at distances of 300, 480, and 630 meters from the pine tree. Searching for the remaining 4 travelers took more than 2 months. They were finally found on May 4th, under 4 meters of snow in a stream valley further into the woods from the pine tree. An examination of the 4 bodies which were found in May changed the picture. 3 of them had fatal injuries. The body of Thibaut Brignolel had major skull damage, and both Dubonina and Solotarev had major chest fractures. The force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high, with one expert comparing it to the force of a car crash. Notably, the bodies had no external wounds, as if they were crippled by a high level of pressure. One woman was found to be missing her tongue. There had initially been some speculation that the indigenous Mansi people may have attacked and murdered the group for encroaching upon their lands, but investigation indicated that the nature of their deaths did not support this thesis. The hikers' footprints alone were visible, and they showed no sign of hand-to-hand struggle. There was evidence that the team was forced to leave the camp during the night as they were sleeping. Though the temperature was very low, around a negative 25 degrees to 30 degrees Celsius, with a storm blowing, the dead were dressed only partially and certainly inadequately for the conditions. Some of them had only one shoe, while others had no shoes or wore only socks. Some were found wrapped in snips of ripped clothes, which seemed to be cut from those who were already dead. Journalists reporting on the available parts of the inquest files claim that it states, 6 of the group members died of hypothermia and 3 of fatal injuries. There were no indications of other people nearby apart from the 9 travelers on Kholat Syakhl, nor anyone in the surrounding areas. The tent had been ripped open from within. The victims had died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. Traces from the camp showed that all group members, including those who were found injured, left the camp of their own accord by foot. One doctor investigating the case suggested that the fatal injuries of the 3 bodies could not have been caused by another human being, owing to the extreme force to which they had been subjected. Forensic radiation tests had shown high doses of radioactive contamination on the clothes of a few victims. The final verdict was that the group members all died because of an unknown compelling force. The inquest ceased officially in May 1959 due to the absence of a guilty party. The files were sent to a secret archive, and the photocopies of the case became available only in the 1990s with some parts missing. Some researchers point out the following facts which were missed, perhaps ignored by officials. After the funerals, relatives of the deceased claimed that the skin of the victims had a strange orange tan. A former investigating officer said in a private interview that his dosimeter had shown a high radiation level on Kholat Syakhl, and that this was the reason for the radiation found on the bodies. However, the source of the contamination was not found. Another group of hikers about 50 kilometers south of the accident reported that they saw strange orange spheres in the night sky to the north, likely the direction of Kholat Syakhl, at the same date as the accident happened. Similar spheres were observed in Ivdel and adjacent areas continually during the period of February to March 1959 by various independent witnesses, including the Meteorology Service and the military. Some reconstructions of the victims' behavior suggest that they were blinded. The rescue team had seen that the victims broke damp and thick pine branches for the fire, even though there was good dry bushwood around. Some reports suggested that much scrap metal was located in the area, leading to speculation that the military had utilized the area secretly and might be engaged in a cover-up.
Rainy Night, Crazy Woman by Cocanoli. Narrated by Mr. Davis.
I made this account to post because my friend said that my experience should be shared here. The house I live in is only a couple hundred meters away from a small church in a suburb. Although I was brought up Christian, I was never truly religious. I only went to said church whenever my parents took me as a kid. My dad died when I was a teenager, and we stopped going as a family altogether. After that, I only went whenever my friends asked me to tag along. Now I'm 21, and I only pass the church whenever I had to go to the city because there's a dirt road beside it that leads to the parking lot behind, adjacent to a major road where it was easy to get on a bus to work. It was closer than the village gate in the opposite direction, and I only had to ride one bus from there. I'm not an easily scared man, nor have I previously experienced lasting trauma after being spooked. I'm here to tell you that what I saw beside that church 3 months ago still haunts me to my core. A storm was announced to hit earlier that week, but leaving for work that early Thursday morning, the skies were clear, not a single cloud to cover the starry sky, so I didn't bring an umbrella. I climbed over the parking lot gate because it was chained shut until 6 for the first mass. The guard at the outpost didn't mind because the church staff knew my family well. I work at a hotel as a line cook, and it's a very demanding job. I have to leave home before the sunrise, and most days I have to work long after it has set. The only time I see the sun is if I'm assigned to a station at the buffet, where we have a view of the poolside. It was an average, overworked, and underpaid kind of day for me. I wasn't assigned at the buffet line. I stayed in the kitchen where there weren't any windows, so I was surprised to see the flooded streets when I clocked out. Apparently it had been raining heavily all afternoon, and it subsided around sunset. It was around 8 in the evening when I left the hotel, and in my country, flooded streets meant standstill traffic for at least a couple of hours. This wasn't that uncommon. I had dealt with similar situations before. It also meant I could sleep on the bus, so it wasn't too upsetting. Fast forward to around midnight, and it's pouring out again. I'm not too far off from the church parking lot, so I decided to go get off the bus and start walking, because I had not budged for the last 10 minutes. I put my phone and wallet in my waterproof backpack, which also contained a spare shirt, my house key, and my knife set. I didn't mind getting wet. Around this time, the parking lot gate was already chained shut, but I climbed over it like I usually do. It was flooded knee-deep in the parking lot, and there was no security guard at the outpost. I figured he retreated into the church. It's dark, but I focused on the small lights from the houses in the distance. They only look like dots from that far. I trudged my way through the open parking lot that could have passed as a kiddie pool when I hear the strange sloshing sound at the far corner of my left. Due to the heavy rain, I couldn't clearly make out what was there, but I knew that I wasn't alone. All the lights to the lot were shut, and the only things to guide me were the few lights of the houses far ahead and my memory of the area's landscape. It's a straight shot from the dirt road, so I didn't have to worry about a light source. The sound of all the falling raindrops accumulated into dull static noise, so it was easy for me to hear that something was going on in that corner. I could see the shape of a person who seemed to be sitting down, so I could only see from the waist up. As I got closer, my eyes better adjusted to the dark. I could tell that it was a woman because of her long hair and curvy outline. She was flailing her arms and splashing the water around, grunting as she pounded her fist into the water. She was about 2 cars' lengths away, so I wasn't too concerned about it. I've dealt with crazy people before. I glanced over a few times as I passed her, and then got to the dirt road. Quite unnerving. She was out of my line of sight at that point, and the mud made it hard to walk. Water was only ankle deep, but I kept having to jerk my foot free after each step because my shoes would sink in the mud. A small splash made me look over my shoulder, and in the darkness of that dirt road, the woman was splayed out face first in the shallow water. I froze, thinking whether or not I should help her. I hated the thought of being the guy who let someone drown in water 6 inches deep. She was about 10 steps away from me, and before I could decide what to do, she started to move. It was too dark to see any details, but her outline was distinguishable enough for me to see that she was looking up at me. She slowly got on her hands and feet like she was about to stand, but her hands lingered on the ground, rump in the air. I was already scared pale at this point. My legs didn't work, and I thought of reaching for my knives, but I was afraid to move. And then she starts crawling towards me on her hands and feet. This sends a jolt through me, and all of a sudden I'm sprinting towards my house. I can hear the splashes behind me along with her coarse breathing, almost like she was coughing. My eyes started filling with tears, and the rain against my face made the light in the distant houses blurry, but I knew at that point I was running for my life. I couldn't tell if she was catching up, but I didn't have it in me to look back. I heard her yell in a voice so rough it resembled a pig squeal. Short, sharp, and loud, a wordless shout of anger. I believe that was the fastest I've ever ran in my life. At this point, I couldn't hear anything but the rain, deafening, unrelenting, and violent. My house was close. I sped by a few houses with their dim porch lights, and I could tell that I was running on asphalt. I didn't know when it happened, but apparently I lost my shoes back at the dirt road. One last bend and I was at my doorstep. I forcefully tore my backpack zipper open and fumbled around inside for the key, frantically looking around to see if she was still chasing me. I got in the house, slammed the door shut, and collapsed. I don't recall the rest of that night, but when I woke up the next morning in my bed, my older brother filled me in. He was awake when I got home that night and went to the front door when the noise alerted him. He said I was on my knees, leaning against the door and quietly sobbing to myself. He woke my mom and they were trying to console me, but I wouldn't talk. They tried to ask me questions, but I would just shake my head. They got me into some dry clothes and led me to bed. Over breakfast, I explained what happened, and my mom said she'd notify the village guards. I could tell that they were concerned for my safety, but they didn't understand the fear that I felt. My brother even joked about it. I didn't go to work that day. In fact, I took the rest of the week off because I caught a fever. The guards did a minor investigation and even increased patrol for a while, but they didn't find anything but my shoes in the parking lot. When I did get better, I started taking the long walk to the main village gate to work. Going home, I now carpool with a buddy who can get me close enough to home that I don't have to use the dirt road route. Days that he can't drive me, I take a taxi, even if it hurts my pocket a bit. I can't walk alone anymore without glancing over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Sudden loud noises make my heart jump. I can't stand the sound of rain. I've been getting better though. I can sleep with the lights off now. I just wish I could stop seeing that crawling woman's shape when I start drifting off to sleep. I wish I could tell you more about her, I honestly do, because it's one thing to be afraid of something, but when you lack the understanding of what you fear, your mind fills in the blanks with terrifying detail.